Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for connecting with us here today to learn about the findings of a recent study on estimating and improving the legality of timber in Peru. This study was commissioned by the Presidency of the Council of Ministers of Peru and developed by the UN FAO Forest Law Enforcement Governance and Trade Program, U.S. Agency for International Development, and the U.S. Forest Service. During the session today, this morning, we'll learn from one of the study's lead scientists, how the study was developed and its key findings. And we'll also hear from the director of Peru's OSINFOR agency, how the government of Peru is using the results from this study and its methodology to continue to advance and work towards decreasing illegal logging and associated trade throughout the country. So presenting the study and the findings today is Dr. Guillermo Navarro, Latin American Forestry Officer with the FAO FLEGT Programme. Dr. Navarro earned his doctorate in Forest Economics and Management from the University of Freiburg, Germany. He also worked at the Center for Tropical Agronomy Research and Higher Education, known as CATIE, in Costa Rica, where he was the director of the Latin American Chair of Forest Policy and Economics for many years. He's also worked with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, among many others. And with that, I will pass it to Dr. Navarro.
Thank you, Kathleen, for the kind introduction. I am honored for presenting the results of the study for estimating and improving legality of timber harvesting in Peru. This presentation has been organized in 5 parts. First, we will present the context. Second, a methodology of the illegal logging indicator. Then the main findings for the year 2017, and also other studies findings, and of course, at the end, we will have some conclusions. Next, please. Next. Well, as you know, the series of studies for the estimation and improvement of the legality of use of wood in Peru is given in the framework of the Multisectoral and Intergovernmental Commission for the establishment of priority public actions for the promotion of sustainable development in the Amazon territories. This commission has given 3 clear mandates. Peru needs a clear policy indicator to measure and monitor the impact of state policies and programs. Also, Peru must have the capacity to respond to the growing demand of wood of legal and sustainable origin that enables the development of a forestry economy that conserves forests and creates human well-being. And also, Peru needs to develop an illegal logging calculation method based on evidence, which is cost-effective and replicable by forest authorities for the annual estimate of illegal production that infiltrate the value chains of legal lumber. As of course, all this at a reasonable effort. Next slide, please. As we can see in this figure, different illegal logging indicators have been measured in many Latin American countries with very limited utility. 4 aspects characterize this calculation of illegal logging in Latin America. First, most of the methodologies are based on indirect methods, which in other words, they are made with interviews, expert opinion, premises, and they use statistical data already processed. Second, they are made by external entities, usually within the context of a project, using different conceptual frameworks, approaches, and of course, different intentions. These indicators of illegal logging usually have very limited use for monitoring or decision-making and management. And on the other hand, they have served more for environmental yellowishness, which has consequently caused more conflict in the forest sector, It has also produced a lot of loss of credibility on the country governance, and has produced a lot of damage on the reputation of its institutions. And of course, the worst part is that this indicator has not been measured periodically. So we don't know how this actually has been projected. Even when we have two indicators in one country in different years, they have been usually done with different methodologies. So it's very difficult to compare them. So this time we will try to estimate the Peru illegal logging, which previously was measured in 2003 by ITTO, and the illegality was calculated in a range between 70 and 90%, which is basically not much to say. Next slide. Slide, please. Of course, we can say that we have found main challenges, 6 main challenges in the development of this illegal logging indicator. The first one was, of course, there was a lack of record keeping for primary and secondary wood transformation. The other, of course, there was no forest record digitalized. Actually, the forest record digitalization started officially in 2018. Of course, we all know that the forest sector have financial, human resources, infrastructure, and technological limitations that have to be taken into account in order to manage and develop the Peruvian forestry sector, which has a very valuable forest resource. We need to create, and one of these challenges was to create an indicator that was going to be a learning process to develop and adapt such impact indicators to the Peruvian reality. Of course, at the same time, we needed to develop the institutional capacity for periodic measurements of these policy impact indicators. And finally, and this is very important, we needed to adjust the expectations for calculating such an illegal logging indicator. For example, this calls us to the question of what is the acceptable level of illegality in the forestry sector, considering that Peru has a labor informality of 96% in rural areas and 67% in urban areas. Also, we have a condition where we have the tax evasion is high. Sales tax evasion is around 36% for the year of the analysis, 2017. And the income tax also is high, is around 57% for the same year. The business informality in Peru, 3 of every 4 enterprises are informal. So this is something that needs to be taken into account. Next slide, please. Of course, we also have to understand that there are 3 main advances in the forest sector, which has allowed this study to take place. You all know that in recent years, Peru has issued policies and legislation that strengthen the sustainable management of forests and promote legal productivity of the forest sector. Also, the administration and information systems are being developed, and this will allow the traceability of wood. This system allows also for cross checks and balances and generate valuable and credible information in real time. And of course, this will allow also that we calculate this index in a disaggregated way per permit type, and in the future also per region. And this, of course, will improve the decision-making for the Forest State Administration. And last but not least is that there is political will and leadership inside the institution of the forest sector. And this is very important. So we have advanced in these calculations. We also have to mention that we have limitations. Of course, we already know that there was no methodology to calculate a quantitative indicator of illegal logging that would allow monitoring for the impact of the legislation and the forest resource management using the same traceability documentation of the wood flows of the country. With this new proposal, we will improve over time and we will overcome this gap. Next slide, please. Next. Well, this figure basically shows that the methodology was adapted from a research study in which we developed a methodology for designing an illegal logging indicator in Nicaragua back in 2009, and when we were at CATIE. Basically, the concept is very simple. We use the supply. We determine the volume of the industrial roundwood harvested and transported in the year 2017 for 9 regions of the country. These, we have, of course, to subtract all the unauthorized extracted volume captured by OSINT-4. And in the supplied methodology, we have used 98% of all these regional, of all the production of the country. From the demand, we have to subtract the demand. Of course, we calculate the industrial wood, roundwood demanded based on a sample of 12 regions, which covers 93% of the turnover. And we, of course, were in contact with 81% of the forest industry population. Next slide, please. Basically, this figure shows the official data that was used. For example, for the supply side, we scan the transportation permits, over 30,000 of them. Of course, we use extraction balances, the document archives for 9 regions of Peru. For calculating the unauthorized extraction, we used the OSINT-4 databases, all the infringement data, and the sanctioning process data. And for the demand, we developed forest industry interviews with a statistical design that accounted for 6% error. And we implemented that in 12 regions in Peru. We use, of course, the databases of SUNAT and also databases of ADEX, SNI, and the top 100 enterprises. Next slide, please. Consideration for improving the methodology in the future, of course, in the side of the supply, the methodology, of course, in the future will benefit a lot because now there is the process of digitalization of key document, which started 1 year after we made the study. Of course, we will have the detailed records keeping for the first transformations. Of course, we now have the industry operations logbook, and of course, we have the control module. For the demand, of course, we need to have the detailed record keeping for industry. Of course, this is yet to be implemented. We have we will need information from OSINT-4 supervision activities. And of course, it will be very important to have a clandestine study of wood, to have that as reference. Next slide, please. Here you can see 6 studies that complement this index calculation. The first one is, of course, concept and the context of the illegal logging indicators. The other, of course, the second document is the main document, which is the illegal logging index and percentage. Then we have 4 more studies about timber flows inside the country, export and imports, especially around with a focus on transaction costs, where we calculate times and costs for exporting and importing. And the 5th study is about the cost of being legal and in the forestry sector. And the sixth study is the case studies for sustainable forest management. Next slide, please. This slide very quickly shows an independent research team, basically composed by Peruvian professionals. and of course, the support of 20 specialists from the Cámara Nacional Forestal. Next slide, please. The study also was peer reviewed by 3 institutions, the U.S. Forest Service, C4, and Texas A&M. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Now we're going to have the findings for the year 2017. As you can see, this is a figure that shows in the superior area, in the green shaded area, you have the legal productive chain from the forest with harvesting permits through the primary and the secondary transformations towards export markets and domestic consumption. In the below, you also can see in the red shadow area, the clandestine productive chain from the forest to the clandestine market. This productive chain is important to mention here, is outside the study. However, there are 3 vertical lines that you can see. One says stumpage, the other says roundwood, and the other says sawnwood. Those are launder timber that are entering or contaminating the legal value chains. And of course, these will be accounted by the methodology. So we will try to calculate, actually the indicator actually means, and we'll calculate how contaminated the legal productive chain is. Next slide, please. Well, this is this figure shows the result of the study, and of course, the illegal logging has been calculated in 37% illegality. This already is a weighted average of all the illegalities from all the permit types. And this means that for every 100 cubic meters, there are 37 cubic meters of wood or timber of illegal origin. Next slide, please. This figure shows the illegal indicator per permit types. For example, you have first the private land permits, you can see in the bottom, has 7% of the legal wood production, but only 25% of illegal logging. So it's the lowest illegal logging indicator. You see it's 37 in average, but in this private land, we only have seen 25% of illegality. In the case of forest concession, that has the highest weights, the highest legal wood production of Peru, 46%. But this productive chain has only 28% of illegal logging, so which is lower than the weighted average. The same with the native and farmers community permits that has 33% of legal wood production of Peru. And this productive change has only 30% of illegal logging, 7 points lower than the weighted average. However, you can see that the local forests and other permits, which has 14% of the legal wood production of Peru, this productive change has almost 90% of illegal logging. So this is a very important way of calculating the indicator, because it gives a lot of basic information to the forest administration to basically tell them, with your small human resources, with the small financial resources, you already have a hint where you can focus the control and try to see what is happening there to improve the legality. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about the other findings of the other studies. For example, you can see here that the export and import studies shows that it's cheaper to import timber than to export timber in Peru. For example, for importing, you will take 4 to 10 days of paperwork, and the cost will be between $25 and $37 per cubic meters. While if you want to export, it will take 7 to 23 days, and the cost will be between $88 to $185 per cubic meter. And of course, you can see also here that 3 companies exported 43% of the timber, which is around $50 million. And 315 companies exported only 4% of the timber with a value of $5 million. Also, this study shows a little bit of how the export portfolio is for Peru, and how you can treat and incentivize this sector. Next slide, please. Also, we have found that, for example, the cost from Loreto, Ucayali, and Madre de Dios are almost the same as exporting from Callao to China. So there is a big limitation of moving timber inside Peru, which equalizes basically this cost to the cost to export into China. So there is a big room of improvement here, and probably this will be probably part of the infrastructure and the logistics that need to be improved inside the country for legal timber. Next slide, please. Regarding timber flows study, the forest sector generates value in every stage of the productive value chain. For example, when we start transforming from stumpage to the log value, usually there is an increase in value to 88 to $117 per cubic meter. But then if we move from the log to create lumber, then we will increase the value of the product to $550 per cubic meter. But if we invest in secondary transformation, from lumber to furniture, for example, it will increase up to $1,500 to $1,400 per cubic meter. So this is important information to make policies that shows that it is important to invest in aggregating value to the timber. Next slide, please. As I mentioned to you, it said that Peru, 96% of the labor in rural areas of Peru is somehow informal. So that's why this study has only reported 96,000 formal employees. That means that this should be around 6 to 10% of the employment created in the forest sector. It's important to notice that around 13,000 jobs is for the primary production in the forest, and 82,000 jobs basically are for primary and secondary transformation. So a lot of impact will be given if you focus and give incentives for the processing of legal timber, then you will create a lot of jobs. It's very sensitive, the investment in primary and secondary transformation in the job creation. Next one, please. Also, this is important, the bureaucratic cost to be legal represent around 27% of the total cost of harvesting. This is very, very expensive because this is only paperwork, and this is weighted with the expense of gasoline, machines, and all these workers doing hard work in the forest. When you compare this to Honduras, Honduras is only 15%, which they consider high already. So this is when understanding and interpreting the illegal logging, you also have to look at all these indicators, secondary indicators, so you know where probably you need to improve. For example, if we use legality as an incentive, probably what the state administration needs to do is to simplify administrative procedure in order to improve legal compliance. Next slide, please. So basically, we arrived to the conclusions. We can say, of course, that Peru has a direct illegal logging calculation method that is simple, robust, and applicable periodically using a real timber volume of transported wood, which is the supply. And of course, we have a reliable database of wood processed by companies in the forest sector, which this is the demand. We have a monitoring instrument. This indicator is based on evidence as a priority axis for decision making. This study identifies in detail information gaps and areas of improvement, which allow adjusting the data collection processes and managing information systems. From the traceability of wood to the measurement of illegality, a robust conceptual framework for the illegal logging indicator, as well as a secondary set of indicators, wood flows, cost of access of legality, of course, provide better light and clarity to reform regulations, improve specificity of public forest management, and eliminate contradiction and controversies in users, in this way increasing compliance. Next slide, please. Of course, we have a lot of opportunity. Already the methodology has been officially adopted. And of course, with the traceability systems in place, this is not a very expensive method to be used for monitoring. Next slide. This slide shows all the acknowledgements of the institution in Peru and other collaborators that have been supporting this study. Next slide. Next. I thank you for your attention, and I'll be very eager to answer or comment on some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo, for your presentation and for sharing information on these significant advances in measuring and reporting on legal and illegal logging in Peru. We will have a question and answer period, but first we will hear from Lucety Ujiyen, Director of Peru's Agency for the Supervision and Inspection of Forest Resources and Wildlife, OSINFOR. Lucety is a forest engineer with a post-grad master's degree in public management and administration and more than 25 years of experience in public policy in Peru. Before leading OSINFOR, she served in many positions, including General Director of Policy and Competitiveness of the National Forest and Wildlife Service of Peru, SERFOR, and has done much work related to forest management and policy in Peru. So, Lucety, please.
Gracias, Katy. Buenos días con todos y con todas. Reciban cordiales saludos desde el Viceministerio de Gobernanza Territorial, de la Presidencia del Consejo de Ministros y desde el mismo OSINFOR, agencia a la cual yo represento, y señalar que en los últimos 10 años el Estado peruano ha venido desarrollando e impulsando un conjunto de políticas y normas públicas de alcance nacional y creando diversos espacios de coordinación para hacer frente a los desafíos de lograr una gestión sostenible de nuestro capital natural conformado por nuestros bosques, impulsar y promover la productividad y competitividad y fortalecer la lucha contra las actividades ilegales como la tala y el tráfico de productos maderales que no tienen origen legal. A su vez, a través de la política de modernización de la gestión pública, viene haciendo incidencias para que las diferentes agencias del gobierno nacional y subnacional fortalezcan la articulación e implementemos lo digital a fin de contar con información oportuna, de calidad y segura para la toma de decisiones en favor de los ciudadanos. Como ya ha sido señalado, mediante el estudio, midiendo y estimando la legalidad de la madera, es la primera vez que Perú cuenta con una metodología de medición de los indicadores de tala, el porcentaje de comercio ilegal en la cadena productiva, tal como lo ha señalado el señor Guillermo Navarro. Es una metodología directa, replicable y que está adaptada a la realidad de las condiciones de nuestros bosques, de nuestro país. Las estimaciones hechas y a las cuales se concluye el estudio están relacionadas para el año 2017. Este porcentaje que arroja en general de tala y comercio ilegal de la madera, del 37%, esta información que ha sido generada, tal como ha sido señalada entre la oferta y la demanda, ¿no?, por la industria de la primera transformación y la resta de los volúmenes de extracción no autorizados. Esta información es clave porque va a tener información valiosa y estratégica para la cadena de comercio que va desde el aprovechamiento hasta el mercado interno de las exportaciones. Siendo así, el estudio indica que la situación de la tala de comercio ilegal en el Perú, que señalaba se encontraba entre los más altos niveles del mundo, oscilan entre el 80 y el 90% y estaba sustentado en estimaciones indirectas. El gobierno del Perú, con miras a obtener el porcentaje de la ilegalidad de cada año, ha encargado realizar la aplicación de la metodología al organismo de supervisión y fiscalización de los recursos forestales y fauna silvestre, o SINFOR, agencia a la cual represento y que es la responsable de supervisar el aprovechamiento de los recursos forestales maderables, de los títulos habilitantes de los recursos forestales maderables de nuestro país. Y este encargo que tenemos como país se sustenta sobre la base de los sistemas avanzados de información soportados por certificaciones de certificación ISO relacionados con la seguridad y la calidad de la información, así como también OSINFOR desde el año 2016 viene ocupando la Secretaría Técnica de la Comisión Multisectorial Permanente de Lucha contra la Tala Ilegal. OSINFOR este año es el compromiso y hemos iniciado la implementación de la metodología para medir el indicador al año correspondiente del año 2018. Y ese es nuestro compromiso de dar cuenta de este índice de tala y de porcentaje de comercio ilegal de la madera en el Perú. Los resultados, como hemos sido señalados, son claves para medir las actividades ilegales de los recursos forestales del país. Se podrá evaluar los avances de las políticas públicas en la lucha contra la tala ilegal y generará mejoras en su implementación a nivel nacional y subnacional. Como SINFOR, durante este mes hemos iniciado realmente las acciones desde marzo, abril y hasta ahora, en este momento. A ver, me está indicando que debería... ¿Me disculpa, por favor? A ver. No sé si se escucha mejor ahora. Gracias. Entonces, ya hemos realizado la socialización del estudio a nivel central y a nivel de las regiones para poder entender justamente la metodología que hemos presentado por los consultores que estuvieron a cargo de realizar la implementación de este trabajo. Lo que hemos buscado es que los diferentes actores que están involucrados en el sector forestal, especialmente los representantes de los pueblos y de las comunidades, la empresa privada, los gremios, las organizaciones civiles, la cooperación internacional, entre otros, pudieran conocer el estudio que se había realizado. Y mediante un trabajo articulado con las agencias del gobierno nacional y regional, se ha conformado el grupo técnico que al final hemos denominado como el grupo operativo, quien va a realizar las acciones técnicas de recoger la información y asegurar que ésta sea de calidad, que sea oportuna, y para eso tenemos el compromiso del equipo técnico, de los profesionales del equipo, así como también de la Autoridad Nacional Forestal y de los gobiernos nacionales, ¿no? Cerca de 30 profesionales que estamos realizando, vamos a realizar un trabajo conjunto y la semana pasada ya hemos socializado un plan y esperamos que este fin de semana podamos tener aprobado un plan de trabajo que ha sido desarrollado en forma conjunta. Lo que estamos pretendiendo al recibir este encargo como país es asegurar esas acciones técnicas, obtener información y cumplir con este importante encargo y de recuperar así paulatinamente el mercado nacional, primero nacional, que está regional, nacional y posteriormente seguramente con el tiempo. Y de esta manera generar mejores ingresos para el productor. Es importante y debo reconocer que no hubiera sido posible realizar este estudio sin el apoyo del programa de USAID y del Servicio Forestal de Estados Unidos. Agradecer por atender la necesidad que ha sido identificada por el Estado y brindar finalmente la asistencia técnica y acompañar el proceso. Así como también por seguir apoyando ahora también lo que va a ser nuestro plan de trabajo para medir este indicador correspondiente al año 2000. Finalmente debo señalar la firme decisión del Viceministerio de Descentralización y Gobernanza Territorial, en esta oportunidad representado por el viceministro Edgardo Cruzado, y de ratificar mi compromiso como SINFOR, ahora que estoy a cargo de la jefatura, de este compromiso de implementar y darle sostenibilidad al estudio, que ha sido recibido como un encargo país, en razón de que determinar el indicador también constituye un compromiso para alcanzar dentro de la Estrategia Nacional de Lucha contra la Ilegal, aprobada preliminarmente por los miembros de la Comisión Multisectorial que conformamos esta comisión. Y esperamos hasta este fin de mes también salga aprobada con la norma pública correspondiente, del cual ha sido realmente el compromiso, que no solamente esté de parte de la Presidencia del Consejo de Ministros, sea un compromiso de 15 instituciones que conformamos la Comisión Multisectorial Permanente de Lucha contra la Tala Ilegal en el país. Nuestro compromiso como SINFOR, ejercer esta secretaría y desde que logremos los resultados. Eso es lo que yo quería comentarles esta mañana, agradecerles por la invitación y mientras yo esté a cargo de los SINFOR, ese es nuestro compromiso de lograr, de cumplir el compromiso y de darle sostenibilidad, porque el indicador de la estrategia ya marca un horizonte del 2021 hasta el 2025 que deberíamos tener todo el conocimiento, mejorar seguramente este resultado de la metodología y poder desarrollar como acción que queda como compromiso como gobierno peruano del sector forestal en nuestro país. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Lucette. Muchas gracias por su presentación y por compartir con nosotros los esfuerzos de OSINFOR. Thank you for sharing information with us about the efforts that Ocean 4 is taking as a lead of the multi-sectoral commission on reducing illegal logging and promoting legal logging, and how this study and this methodology is part of those efforts. So now, with the time that we have remaining, we will open up the session to questions and answers by our panelists. Feel free to write your questions in the chat. Also, we did have one question about where these reports, the overall summary report, but there are also 6 reports that were the foundation for the index and the illegal logging statistics. The link has been included in the chat, and so you can find those documents and more information there. So let's see, we have a first question to kick things off. Other studies have estimated a much higher rate of illegal logging in Peru. Those are previous historical studies, I think, that this person is referring to. Do you think that illegal logging rate in Peru has declined? Perhaps Guillermo, if you would like to start with that question.
Yes, thank you for the question. Very important. The last time the indicator was measured was in 2013 by ITTO, and it reflected, they gave a range of 70 to 90%. Of course, they use indirect methods. So it's difficult to compare with this other indicator and to try to, because they have two methodologies, two different methodologies. One was an indirect method, and this one was a direct method. So I don't think we can basically compare, because we don't know how the 2003 treated the clandestine, which we are not considering. So we cannot calculate or consider that based on before was 70-90%, and now we are low to 40. I think this study should be considered a baseline from now on.
Very good, thank you. We have another question from Bean Tran. I'm curious why the export is more expensive than the import. Does the report look into this, and is there any of this to the illegal logging? I think maybe is any of this attributable to illegal logging and deforestation? So Guillermo, I know you discussed this briefly, but perhaps you could give a little more detail on those differences between import and export costs and how those were calculated for the legal timber trade.
Yes, I think this is not the, we have, the data shows that importing is cheaper than exporting. And I don't think this is the situation that is the product of illegality. I would say this is one of the causes that explain illegality. If exporting is too expensive, we can assume that actors in the forest sector are trying to escape bureaucratic costs, and probably they don't have an option. So I think usually they will try to escape cost and times, if you understand how the market behaves, you have to deliver. When you have to sell something, you have to deliver on the right quantity with the right quality and on time. And if you have a lot of problems when you have to comply, you have to deal with a bureaucratic system that is expensive, and of course it takes a lot of time. There is an incentive to move away from legality. So I think the idea here, if you will make the country competitive, and you will create that legal exporting of timber will be cheaper. That would be an incentive to be legal. The same happens with the cost of legal compliance from sustainable forest management. If those costs, export costs and legal compliance at the national level go down, I would infer, the hypothesis would be that the indicator of illegal logging will go down.
Okay, there's another question on, are there any interlinkages between illegal timber trade and wildlife tracking? Perhaps Lucetti, as the director of the agency for the supervision of forestry and wildlife, could you speak to maybe how these new approaches to monitoring illegal logging, but also links between illegal logging and illegal wildlife trafficking?
Bueno, nosotros durante los viajes de supervisión, que es lo que nos corresponde cuando estamos en el momento del aprovechamiento, ¿no? Con nuestras acciones, lo que hemos podido identificar sí es que nos hemos concentrado en desarrollar los problemas de ver cómo están el cumplimiento de las obligaciones de los titulares, ¿no? Los que cuentan con un plan de manejo autorizado, para ver si están cumpliendo en ese marco de sus competencias o los encargos que se le ha otorgado el Estado, que deben de cumplir con estas tareas y sus compromisos. Lo que hemos visto es realmente este cumplimiento, y lo que hemos podido más bien encontrar es que sí hay, cuando hay alguna tala ilegal, sí hay un compromiso con algunas especies que albergan especies de la fauna silvestre, ¿no? Entonces, caso de la castaña, y principalmente que perjudica estas acciones. Cuando desarrollamos las supervisiones a las autorizaciones que han sido otorgadas por los gobiernos regionales con relación a los temas de fauna silvestre, lo que hemos ido a ver también es el cumplimiento de estos planes de manejo, ¿no? ¿Qué factores se pueden originar? Pero sí realmente a través de algunas acciones conjuntas que desarrollamos con la Autoridad Nacional Forestal y con los gobiernos regionales, sí hemos podido identificar que hay los problemas bastante fuertes, especialmente por las zonas norte de nuestro país, así como también por la Amazonía, que llegan para salir por las acciones de Lima, temas que corresponden a la comercialización ilegal de la fauna silvestre. Estos temas de control y de vigilancia están a cargo de la Autoridad Nacional y de los gobiernos regionales, ¿no? Entonces, nosotros lo que vamos a verificar es el cumplimiento de los planes de manejo, ¿no? Entonces, pero indirectamente sí formamos parte del grupo de trabajo sobre los cuales tenemos que ver cómo hacemos en conjunto, qué las acciones que podemos desarrollar y algunas acciones operativas que también pueden participar nuestras oficinas desconcentradas a solicitud de la Fiscalía Especializada en Materia Ambiental. También hemos participado, o de la Procuraduría, para apoyar estas acciones, que nos corresponde también porque tenemos que hacer acciones en conjunto para disminuir ambos problemas de la tala y en este aspecto también del tráfico ilegal de la fauna silvestre, ¿no?
Very good, muy bien, gracias, Lucete. Highlighting the importance of the multi-level governance of promoting legal logging and reducing illegal logging and wildlife trafficking. Okay, we have another question on what role do you see for whistleblowers in combating the illegal timber and illegal logging in Peru?
Las acciones que estamos directamente en los temas relacionados con los temas de investigación, nosotros están a cargo de la Fiscalía Especializada en Materia Ambiental. Lo que nosotros brindamos a través de nuestros sistemas de información y que son productos de las supervisiones que realizamos, tanto en flora como fauna silvestre, tienen un espacio donde nuestro sistema aloja, que le hemos llamado el sistema de información gerencial, donde hay un observatorio, ¿no? Tanto para el tema de la madera y un zoo de información, de observatorio, un observatorio que permite ingresar y ver cuáles son las dificultades que se tienen al momento de identificar si alguien está cometiendo una infracción a la ley forestal y de fauna silvestre y sus reglamentos. ¿No es cierto? A partir de esa información que se notifica paralelamente al gobierno nacional y a los gobiernos regionales, así como también a la Fiscalía, inmediatamente pueden ver las acciones con esta información y puedan tomar las acciones correspondientes, ya que las intervenciones o esas interdicciones no le corresponden a la SINFOR. Puede apoyar parte, pero esas acciones son lideradas por la Fiscalía especializada en materia ambiental, ¿no?
Okay, I think we have time for one or maybe two more questions. Does OCEAN4 currently have sufficient resources to detect when the guías de transporte or the transport permits are filled in with false information, especially as to the place of the timber's origin?
Bueno, con relación a las guías de transporte forestal, ¿no? Que son emitidas por los gobiernos regionales, ¿no? Nosotros, cuando realizamos las supervisiones a los titulares, los dueños de los títulos habilitantes, lo que hacemos es ver si esta documentación está acorde a los compromisos y obligaciones que tiene el titular de poder desarrollar ese trabajo. Entonces, los recursos presupuestales, ¿no es cierto?, están asignados para la competencia de supervisiones de las acciones forestales. Entonces, esa es la columna y el eje central del objetivo misional de OCEAN4. Una parte, cuando se supervisa, sí es varias documentación que se tiene que ver. Cómo está la estructura, si está bien desarrollado, las acciones que están comprometidas con el Plan Nacional Forestal, la movilización de la madera, su guía de transporte forestal, sí tiene la resolución correspondiente, etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, sí tiene, esta parte del presupuesto conforma estos trabajos de supervisión, ¿no? Entonces, a partir del año 19 estábamos en una mejor situación económica de asignación presupuestal para las agencias del gobierno del Perú, tanto regionales como nacional. A partir del marzo del 2019, del 20, que hemos tenido el problema de la pandemia, los recursos se han tenido que reorientar para atender e implementar, ¿no?, el plan de vigilancia sanitaria, que es un cumplimiento de la norma de salud, del Ministerio de Salud, que tenemos que implementar. Eso ha hecho que muchos de nuestros recursos ahora se hayan reducido, porque hemos tenido que reprogramar, priorizar para implementar este plan de emergencia, y eso ha afectado en el año 2020 en nuestras supervisiones. Hemos tenido que reducir el número, pero también era porque no podíamos salir. O sea, teníamos desde el mes de marzo hasta septiembre, octubre, ya realmente no hemos podido, hemos tenido que cumplir los protocolos de aislamiento. Entonces, no ha habido las posibilidades. Y los 2 últimos meses, que a partir de noviembre y diciembre, ya pues se acumularon con las lluvias, que realmente, y pudimos hacer algunas supervisiones, ¿no? En este año 2020, cumpliendo todos los protocolos para no generar problemas de salud a las comunidades nativas y a los dueños de los titulares, lo que hemos hecho ya casi hemos cumplido a un 100% porque reorientamos nuestras acciones para empezar desde mayo, ¿no? Las supervisiones desde abril, mayo, junio. En agosto ya vamos a estar terminando, ¿no? Porque también se había conjugado, además de la pandemia, con las elecciones presidenciales que tenemos como gobierno. Entonces, pero sí, eso nos ha permitido también mejorar nuestras acciones de supervisión y esperamos que realmente el Ministerio de Economía y Finanzas, con los resultados que ahora estamos mostrando, que ya hemos cumplido principalmente las supervisiones, que es la responsabilidad que tenemos como OSINFOR, puedan asignarnos a lo mejor por el mes de agosto o septiembre una demanda adicional y poder volver a recuperar lo que antes teníamos, que también es muy poco los recursos que recibe de OSINFOR. Podemos hacer más supervisiones, pero depende también de los recursos que son demandas adicionales, porque el presupuesto que tenemos asignado cada año debe de ser mejorado realmente, ¿no? Gracias.
Gracias, Lucetti. Okay, maybe one last question, if we can squeeze it in, if everyone will hang on. Let's see, this perhaps for you, Guillermo. I understand this study does not take into account clandestine timber or timber that has no associated harvest permit or other type of documentation. How could this clandestine timber be measured and incorporated into the measure of illegal logging and the index?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as I have explained, the the study only maps the legal productive chains, and of course, it will account for the level of contamination of this legality, and nothing is done on understanding how the clandestine productive chains are organized. So the first thing you have to do is, of course, understand how these productive chains are organized. So it is, as I also mentioned, there is the need for a clandestine study to have an idea of how big this clandestine market is and how the value chain is located, is organized, who are the actors, and what is the modus operandi. You know, do they work and transport timber at night, or weekends? Where do they sell? And then you have to make a projection. Of course, this is a very delicate study. You know, you have to go somehow underground. It has to be with scientific purposes, so you are able to get the information without risking the researchers, and have an idea of how big the clandestine productive value chains and markets are. But this is very important to have as a reference, so you know, you have an idea of the whole picture. At this moment, we don't know how big the clandestine market is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of our time in our session. I'm sure we could all stay here for much longer if the time permitted, but we want to thank Guillermo and Lucetti, and for all of the participants who joined in today. Again, there's a link to the documents that were used in this report in the chat, so we encourage you to access them, review them, and feel free to send questions and comments to the authors and to the participants of this session today. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to the next interaction.